Hello, I'm Sean Richards of Not Yes Man's Economics. My topic of today is Japan, the land of the rising sun, or Nihon, as they'd put it. Except the news hasn't been like that in economic terms for quite some time. The context for the current pandemic is that Japan's been in what's been called the lost decade since, depending which sector of the economy you pick, somewhere between 1990 and 1995. Before then, Japan was seen as a superpower, growth, powering ahead. Since then, it hasn't really made any progress at all on a national level. So this morning's news that GDP had fallen by 7.8% in the second quarter needs to be reviewed in that sort of context, I think. If we look at the bare numbers, it was minus 9.9%. Why am I looking at it like that? Well, if we compare to the past at the minute, there isn't really anything to compare to, is there? So there's a problem with seasonal adjustment, I think. If we start to break the numbers down, we see that there's a vulnerability here for what we regard as an exporting nation, which is of the fall, 3% of it was exports. So there's a shift there. Bringing that back also, we see that the Japanese economy had shrunk in the first quarter, although not by a lot, less than elsewhere, but also at the end of last year. Why? Japan had chosen to raise its consumption tax from 8% to 10%. So a bad timing, you can look at it like that. Why is it doing that? Well, if we flip to the other side of the situation, Japan has a lot of public debt. The stimulus measures are obviously still in flux, but somewhere in excess of 40% of annual economic output, or GDP, will be done, which will add to the debt, which is the next factor we look at, which is the Bank of Japan buys so many things there. What do I mean? It owns about 44% of the government bond market. More unusually, it's a big buyer of Japanese equities. And yes, I do mean it's buying shares. And it's acquired the nickname the Tokyo Whale for doing this. It's slightly elusive at times as to what the exact numbers are. I've seen someone put up some data suggesting that it's around 6% of the topic index. So in terms of the actual overall market, it's a significant amount. But more than that, because if you think about it, in the flow of buying and selling, if you get a buyer of that size, keep chomping away, we think of it as a Pac-Man game, that has quite an impact on prices. So that we see official intervention in Japan everywhere. It's intervening in loans, it's buying government bonds, buying shares, buying corporate bonds, and so on. And that's another symbol of the situation, that Bank of Japan's role in the economy gets ever larger. Some people suggest that some of those models could be followed abroad. It follows a thing called yield curve control to make borrowing for the Japanese government cheap. And people say that should be followed. But if we now go back to my introduction at the beginning, we see that Japan's been in trouble for quite some time. If these things were working, it wouldn't be, would it? Or we'd have some sign of it getting better. Even if we take out the recent pandemic episode, Japan was struggling. On the other side of the coin, and here's something that can be seen as positive, which is individually it's done better, what we call per capita GDP. Although again, as we often see in the yin and yang of Japanese issues, there is another side to that, which is that the population's now falling. We can spin that round again, if you like, because in terms of green issues and sort of demand for resources, Japan in itself is what you might regard as a good player, because it's cutting some of those simply by the fact there are fewer people there. Although, of course, there'll be a drain on things because people are aging. So the overall picture here is very, very complex. You might think, looking at all of this, that the currency, the yen, would be under pressure, but it hasn't been. At 106.4 or, around that sort of level versus the US dollar, we're not seeing a situation where the yen's falling. That's in spite of the fact that it's government and Bank of Japan policy for it to do so.